You do it to yourself, you do. And that's what really hurts. You do it to yourself, just you. You and no one else. You do it to yourself. You do it to yourself.
Let's just say, hypothetically, you met a younger person who told you they'd love to be an actor, but they just can't cope with the auditioning process. They love acting, but they hate auditions. It causes them anxiety, causes them even to feel suicidal and self-harm. The stress, the scrutiny, the rejection. And you got to go to 20 auditions, 50 auditions, get rejected again and again before you find that one rare opportunity that lets you get ahead as an actor, right? You're talking to someone who thinks they'd like to be an actor, but they're wrong. The people who really want to be actors, the people who want to get ahead in theater and film, those are exactly the people who can thrive on the rejection. They're the people who can get up and go to audition again and again and again, and they're hungry for more. Those are the people who are cut out for this business. Those are the people who can and will succeed, and those are the people who will get stronger from failure. It's really misleading to articulate this point in terms of either vice or virtue. What are the qualities you need to be a surgeon? One of them is a particular kind of fortitude when you're faced with blood and gore and human suffering and anguish. I don't think that makes you a nice person. I don't think it makes you a good person if you have that characteristic of remaining calm and indifferent when you're looking at somebody's blood and guts, to be blunt, but you may also be seeing their suffering, their anguish, etc. But that's exactly the characteristic you need to be a good surgeon. Right or wrong, virtue or vice, doesn't matter. What kind of person can get on stage as a stand-up comedian and entertain people with either indifference or maybe even contempt when the audience doesn't find their joke funny? Have a certain kind of reckless self-confidence or detachment, however you want to think of it, where they can get up on stage and get rejected and fail again and again and again. They still want to pursue comedy. Doesn't really matter if you think of it as a vice or a virtue, but this is a characteristic you need to be a stand-up comedian. In terms of who I'd like to spend time with, it's probably not going to be the sort of person who's a naturally gifted surgeon, nor the sort of person who's a naturally gifted stand-up comedian. They're all kind of weird and disturbing people to be around, frankly, probably in part because they have that strange detachment that let them get ahead in their job at an early stage. And hey, you've got to be skeptical about the extent to which these characteristics may be acquired. We will never have a statistic for how many people show up at medical school and feel anxious, nervous, nauseated, and maybe also feel a kind of sorrow and sympathy when they're looking at a person who's been injured, like say injured in a car accident, lying there suffering with blood and gore around, or when they're in a surgical theater observing the process underway, person's skin being cut through, blood being exposed, and so on. We'll never have a statistic for how many people show up with those instincts and inclinations and then just overcome them. Within a couple of years, they find they just don't care anymore. We'll never have a statistic for how many stand-up comedians manage to overcome their sense of anxiety, their sense of vulnerability, their sense of fragility to proceed with a career in comedy. But we actually do have statistics for how many people go to medical school and then say they have to drop out because they just can't cope with the blood, with the gore, with the suffering, with the sorrow. And you know what? I don't think that makes you a bad person. If you're vulnerable in that way, if you're fragile in that way, maybe that means you have more capacity for sympathy. Maybe it's in some sense a virtue. But guess what? This job, being a surgeon, it ain't for you. You don't have the requirements. This is not a situation of you need to be cruel to be kind. This is just and exclusively a form of kindness. If you have a friend who's going out and trying to be a stand-up comedian, but every time he or she has a bad night at the comedy club, they come home and they're self-harming, they're talking about suicide, they're phoning people up asking them to talk them out of suicide, or they're actually attempting suicide. Don't be cruel to be kind. Just be kind. Sit down with your friend and say, stand-up comedy is not for you. You are not cut out for this. You do not have what it takes. It doesn't matter if you think of it as a vice or a virtue. It's just a characteristic. You ain't God. There are red flags here that go deeper and further than YouTube. Do you notice that Rachel Oates, she points the finger across the internet to someone who made mean comments on Twitter, and she asks, do I deserve this? Do I deserve self-harm? Do I deserve to be bleeding because she cut herself? And to have uploaded this onto the internet and to be humiliated because she uploaded herself. There is a steadfast refusal on her part to accept responsibility for any of her decisions. There's a reason why it's called self-harm, because you do it to yourself. What can we say to someone who uploads a video of this kind, a video of what I would call attempted suicide? I don't know where you come from. If you slit your wrists or cut your arm open and are bleeding and so on, you've just seen her description on screen. I don't know why it would be unreasonable to describe that as a suicide attempt. But you upload a video of yourself attempting suicide, then you receive more than $3,000 in donations. And this is because you were in a contest of the wills, with someone else on the internet who in fact already played this same victim card, right? I mean, this is the other irony. You say, I had it on screen a second ago, unlike EOT, I will never use my mental health issues, social issues, or self-harm as a shield or a way to manipulate my audience. Right, but that is kind of what ended up happening anyway, right? And you got rewarded for it to the tune of more than $3,000. So there's something profoundly unhealthy going on here, where in the year 2019, the internet becomes a kind of fragility Olympics. One side of this debate, EOT, Essence of Thought, said, oh, well, I'm so fragile. If this other person says something transphobic or has a critique of trans rights or something, then that could push me over the edge into suicide at any given moment. It could push me back into self-harming, and it would be that person's fault. And Rachel comes back playing the same victim card and saying that she's spent her whole life also teetering on the edge of suicide, also teetering on the edge of self-harm. So she's even more fragile. And then pointing the finger at this trans rights activist and saying, your criticism of me, to quote her exactly, quote unquote, do I deserve to be self-harming? Do I deserve this? Are we getting away from the fact that, as the song says, you do it to yourself?
You do it to yourself, you do. And that's why it really hurts. You do it to yourself, just you. You and no one else. You do it to yourself. You do it to yourself. Oh, yeah, you do.
But the most toxic, dangerous assumption of all is that you can hurt yourself and blame someone else for it. Okay? I've been through an unbelievably horrible divorce, and I've still got lawyers, and I'm still in court, and it ain't over yet, and custody battle over how much time I get to spend with the daughter. It's terrible. Guess what? If I commit suicide, that's on me. I had an unbelievably horrible childhood. Nobody can ever make it better. Screwed up by it in all kinds of ways. Guess what? If I commit suicide, that's on me. Nobody can be blamed. You can't point the finger at my ex-wife. You can't point the finger at my mom. Nobody can be blamed but me. Rachel Oates, you're 26 years old. I think you're a victim of the same ideology that leads to all these other people getting on the internet and trying to broadcast their fragility. They're broadcasting their fragility to make money and gain social approval. I think you're a victim of the same mentality as Zoe Quinn. Zoe Quinn, right now, trying to present herself as a victim. Her ex-boyfriend committed suicide because he lost his job, and he lost his job because of comments on the internet Zoe Quinn made about what a bad boyfriend he was. And what card does Zoe Quinn play? She plays the victim card. She plays the fragility card. She plays the self-harm card. She says she's got a therapist and she's teetering on the edge of suicide all the time anyway. She says she's the victim. And whose fault is it? Donate money now. I think you're playing the same game Onision is playing. Onision, to this day, presenting himself as a victim in all of his interactions with women. 18-year-old girl he'd been employing as his live-in babysitter. He gets sexually involved with her. They break up. He kicks her out of the house. She's got to get her own apartment, get her own job. We have screenshots of him accusing her of rape. He's a 33-year-old man, and he was her employer, and he's a famous D-list celebrity on the internet. But we are to believe that this girl who moved into his house at 16 and left at 18, that she raped him, that he's the victim. All right? We have a discourse that's fixated on fragility and is rewarding fragility. And what we need to get back to is a healthy, detached discourse about fortitude. And the type of fortitude we're talking about here, it may not be a vice and it may not be a virtue. But some people have what it takes to do stand-up comedy. Some people have what it takes to be a surgeon. And some people don't. Rachel, you produce garbage content on YouTube. The only content you got I can respect is your content about makeup. I completely believe you've mastered the art of makeup. Admittedly, I'm an amateur in that department. However, your criticism of the book of Genesis is garbage. You're a 26-year-old adult woman. Anyone can find better by going to Google Scholar and putting in atheist critique of the book of Genesis. Anyone. The intellectual caliber and substance and merit of your videos is terrible. Okay? And you've now put yourself in this position where you criticize others. Of course, not just on transphobia and trans rights. It's a very minor issue for your channel. You're criticizing fundamental social, political, and religious issues. But if people then criticize you, look at the games you play. Sweet pea, quit now. Because you're blaming others when the fact is you do it to yourself.
That's why really hard to do it to yourself, just you. You and no one else, you do it to yourself. You do it to yourself. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-da, ba-da-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-da, ba-da-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-da.